Sustainability, it's a big word and it's been a little buzzy lately, so it might seem unclear what the definition really is. In actuality, it's kind of straightforward, but that doesn't mean it's simple to do. So today, we're going to go big picture. We're going to help you understand 4 different questions that you should know to ask yourself if your packaging is actually sustainable. So what is sustainability? Well, let's say I'm running a factory. In order to produce anything, I need resources. So I dip my hand in over here and I take some and I give them to my factory. And hopefully I produce something really cool and that goes out into the world and gets used by people, recycled, and put back into my resource pile. That process of borrowing, that's what's kind to Mother Earth over here, because you shouldn't be taking and using forever, you should be borrowing. That's the balance. So let's look at an example of a life cycle. Over here in the paper industry, trees are grown like crops, and they're sent over to factories, produced into paper. That paper gets used by customers and recycled, and that biodegrades and turns into CO2, which then gets used up by little new baby trees. That's a life cycle, folks, a paper life cycle. As I'm sure you can tell, this is a really simplified version, and just of one industry, the paper industry. There's so many things going on in all these steps, and every material has a different story. So that parlays perfectly into what I'd like to discuss first. What materials are you using? One of the first questions to ask yourself is, what is my packaging made of? Once you have your answer, you can start to dissect its impact on the environment. Now, there are a bunch of different types of packaging, but almost all of it is made out of some type of paper or some type of plastic. Most papers, even when printed, are recyclable at a local recycling center. The only thing that would change that is any special coating or wax or metallics or something like that. Now, over to plastic. If you're using a thicker plastic like a bottle, it's pretty easy to throw this puppy in the recycling bin. But the thinner plastic and films can be a little bit tricky. Region by region, the rules change. But whatever they lack in just easy recycling, they make up for using less material and less space. Now for a flub alert. You guys, bonded materials are extra tricky in recycling because it's a piece of paper, in this case, bonded to plastic, and have to be fully separated to be recycled easily. That makes it very tricky. Does the same thing apply to when you see packing tape on a box? Fortunately, no, because the Standard Recycling Center actually has a method for dealing with this because it's so common, and they sift the plastic out and it gets dealt with separately. Now I think it's time we talk about the factory where all this stuff goes down. You gotta ask yourself, how are the resources used at the factory? Because a factory is a building, it's a physical place, and they've got a lot of choices that they can make. They can use more sustainable materials, they can also affect things with their processes. You can look at all the materials that walk into that factory. Yes, sometimes they walk, I don't know, and they're walking in, and then you can look at what pops out on the other side. That's their true waste, people. You can also look at their systems to see if they're recapturing energy or water and really operating in a sustainable way. Next up, we're talking transportation. How much space does my packaging take up in transit? Well, you gotta think about this in 2 phases, folks, because there's how much space it takes up in transit from where the packaging itself is produced to get to your distribution center, and then there's how much space it takes up going from your distribution center all the way to your customer. The more distance your packaging has to travel, the more emissions it racks up in the process. And things can get even worse if you start expediting and doing things like air freight, because emissions can get even crazier. Now let's talk about space. No, not that kind of space. The space that your packaging actually takes up on its own. This is a stack of 30 boxes, and this is a stack of 30 polymailers. What does that mean in real life? Well, let me riddle you this. This is how much space 5,000 polymailers takes up in a truck, but that same 5,000 boxes takes up nearly an entire truckload. So you're really losing a lot of efficiency in transit there. And the effects continue in fulfillment. That same box takes up this much space when it's shipping to your customer, but that polymailer is much lower profile and so ships more efficiently as well. Guys, we've arrived at the last question. How do customers throw away my packaging? Now, this is also known as the big recyclability question, and it might be the very first thing that popped into your brain when I started talking about sustainability. But it's not the only thing. It actually goes all the way back to the first subject, which was materials, because whatever you made your packaging out of determines how recyclable it is at the end of the day. And every city has different rules about this stuff. Why? Because modern recycling facilities are really expensive and all can process different materials. So the best thing you can do to set your customers up for success is tell them what material you used. And one great way of doing that, especially in all the plastic materials, is by putting the recycling code right on the package itself. This is like a code that tells your customers what it's made out of and is really helpful in encouraging actual full recycling. So hop on it, know your materials and label your materials. Woo! I'm so glad you guys are still with me. That's a lot of information to retain, I totally get it, but that's how complicated sustainability can be. Materials, factories, transit, recyclability, there's so much to think about when trying to make your packaging sustainable. But now that you're armed with information, you're gonna do way better at making your packaging friendly to good old Mother Earth. And don't forget, the team here at Lumi nerds out about this stuff. So if you ever run into challenges, you know who to call.